Game Changers, the podcast that studies what it takes to be a success in broadcasting, featuring lessons from the world's best presenters, programmers, and thought leaders. This week on Game Changers, from New York City, Broadway Bill.
You have to surf the intro, and the word is surf. That's exactly the visual I want guys to have, because you have to be in the curl. You have to be visible, audible, and yet at the same time surrounded by the music.
Yeah.
And if you got the ears for it, that's exactly what you're doing.
Broadway Bill Lee, welcome to Game Changers.
Oh, thank you. I'm telling you, it's so wonderful to be able to reach broadcasters around the world with the internet. It used to just be, little conclaves and enclaves of disc jockeys talking together, and look at us.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. It's so exciting to have you on the podcast. Now, you have a huge fan base in Australia, and when I say huge, radio nerds like me, we just love watching. We love watching and hearing you on those Facebook videos. They are just something to behold, Bill. They are unbelievable.
Oh, wow, Wednesday.
Oh, wow.
On CBS FM.
Broadway Bill, may I ride shotgun or is this seat taken? Internationally, the whole world is quaking, yet Mama is still in the kitchen making bacon. Little sister's upstairs still dreaming about Clay Aiken. Your brother's at the toll booth ticket taking, and you're in the driver's seat shaking.
Well, thank you. I love just totally jazzing the tens of dozens that love seeing these things.
So there's plenty of video footage of you online, a lot of YouTube clips. So what was the thinking behind the Facebook content? Was that something that were you thinking, okay, well, how do I share what I'm doing with others, or what was the idea behind it?
Underneath everything else, that's why it happened now. But back in 1980, my program director at KFRC, Jerry Cagle, decided to video check all of his disc jockeys. And we did it, had a blast doing it, and the final product was so stunning that for about 10 years, broadcasters, programmers, it was like an underground narcotic that everybody had to see. And I looked at it, even looking at the other jocks, it was just so exhilarating that I knew the power of this thing. And then guys like Art Volo and George Junak at California Air Checks started doing it because they saw it too. And they'd release these video air checks and that kind of thing. And every time they'd come to town, they'd get me. And, then I'd start getting emails finally from guys that said, wow, that was really cool. By the time I realized that this could be done, I looked at my iPhone and said, I'm able to make a phone call and put audio into my iPhone. There's got to be a way to take audio from the radio, put it into the iPhone, and just videotape yourself sending something out. It took me about a year with, and not broadcast engineers, they had no idea how to do it. Right. But I went to the Apple store and talked to one of the geniuses, and he said, what you really need is an interface between analog and digital, and we can do this. So we looked up together on Amazon. There was a digital interface unit for guitar players that could record right into their iPhone. I said, that'll do it. That'll do it. So I found the device, and boom, I was able to start doing it about, 2 years ago now.
Wow. Well, there you go. And 12,000 miles away, we're applauding every time we see you on Facebook, mate. It's unbelievable. Hey, so let's start in Cleveland.
Thank you.
Cleveland, 1972. You've just scored your first job at a radio station doing weekend shifts, and according to you, apparently you sucked.
Oh, boy, did I suck. I was so bad. Actually, I turned down a job in Paoli, Indiana. It was for $80 a week, and there were several trailers on the property of the radio station. And the owner said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll charge you $80 a month to live in one of these trailers, and I'll pay you $80 a week. And I mean, out in the middle of nowhere. And I said, yeah, you think I'm going to pass on this? So went back to Cleveland. My wife and I actually, I would work on the assembly line at White Motors making, trucks, diesel trucks. Mm-hmm. That was third shift. So all day long, I'd be making tapes and wanting to get a job and trying to get something close and all of that. Finally, this radio station was only about 2 miles away from where I lived, and it was kind of a local but very strong FM signal in the area. And my wife called up the program director and said, hey, my husband's willing to work for free. and they obviously said, well, no, he doesn't have to work for free, but, bring him in, And so I went in and I got the job Sunday morning running religious shows and public affairs programs. And, I was kind of cocky. So every once in a while, I'd open the mic between shows and do a weather forecast. That was just awful. I just awful. My voice sounded kind of like this because very nasal. And hi, this is Bill Linke, and here's the weather. I mean, I sounded ridiculous. But finally, the afternoon guy got fired. This was WLYT in Cleveland, 92.3. And the afternoon guy got fired. He was also the program director. So the general manager called me and said, get in here. We're going to I said, okay, great. And so a consultant from the chain came in to be the program director. I got a brand new pair of Koss Pro 4 AA headphones another disc jockey had given me. And when I strapped these things on my head, my voice actually sounded good enough where I was able to gain confidence. And so then I would just mimic what I heard all my favorite disc jockeys doing. With these great headphones on, I went, I got this.
So what were your goals in the early stages, Bill? Were you did you have the audacious dreams of New York City and doing the sorts of things that you've done over the last 20 years? Or what was the plan? What was the grand plan?
Craig, I'm so glad you asked that, because the truth is, I've never had any goals in my whole life.
Really?
I would go into the radio station for the joy of playing the music first and foremost, because I was kind of a musician as a teenager. And I just did it for the love of what I was doing. And when I actually sounded good over the intros of these records, it's just the biggest turn on. I think I was making $100 a week, and it was great because my wife was making $100 a week, so we had enough to live on, and that's pretty much as far as I looked.
Right, okay.
Until I started getting offers, and then I had to look forward.
So where were you getting feedback from in those early stages? Was it a case of learning on the job, or did you take home your air checks and sort of do a self-review, or did you have some mentors and programmers that guided you along the way in those early stages?
Thank you for asking that too, because the truth is I didn't know it then, but each and every program director, each and every technical setup at each and every radio station is the best teacher ever. Yeah, learning on the job, no doubt about it. And listening to air checks, of course, but only the good ones.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. I mean, I can only cringe so often when I hear something awful. When I step on vocals or something. I can only hear that once and then turn around and go smoke a cigarette, come back and try it again.
Right. Okay. So it's that test and learn and retest and get it right eventually.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And you know what the thing is? I don't think a lot of people realize I've been doing this for 45 years. Of course I don't suck.
Did you have an aha moment at any stage where everything clicked for you on the air, or was it a gradual process of? It sounds like it was a gradual process of refinement and improvement. But did you have a moment where you thought, "Oh shit, I think I've got this. I think I'm getting pretty good at this." Did you have a sense of that at all?
It's interesting because after about 2 years in the business, I was working for a programming consultancy. He was my first program director. He loved me in afternoons. He knew I would hang around after the show and try to pick up as much as I could from him. He would make me his secretary when I would start typing out his proposals to radio stations. So I went to work for Bill Paris, who was a programming consultant. And I became one of his program directors. And that was my main thrust and focus because I just loved the business by this time. I was good on the air, totally competent enough to go into a radio station, demonstrate to the entire staff how we wanted it done with crash and roll, forward momentum, energy, all the things we wanted to do. And it became something that I became an expert at in the first few years of my career. So it actually worked out in my favor where I could not only be a performer, but more than a performer, the teacher. So that's how the ball kind of got rolling, and I realized that, of course, I've got confidence. Of course, I can do this. I'm teaching other guys how to do this.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, and mate, I'm not even in the same ballpark. I couldn't share the same oxygen as you from an on-air perspective. But I was a program director and afternoon announcer for a couple of years, and I always had that sense that the rest of the on-air roster was listening when I was on the air. Even they weren't. I knew that was not to every break anyway. But I always had that feeling that if I could get it right, if I could demonstrate how I wanted the station to sound through my own shift, that would be the best way to kind of, you can send the memo and you can send an email or whatever, but if you can get on the air and actually deliver the shift that you want to hear other announcers do, that's kind of the best way to lead by example, I guess.
Yeah, here's the thing. You started much later than you must have started much later than I did, because back when I got started, program directors would listen to everybody all the time, and as soon as you did something they disagreed with, you would get hotlined. And
Yes.
I got to tell you a funny story. Harry Nelson, a good friend of mine who worked as a program director with the RKO chain, years later, we went up to North Dakota to start a regional network, and we put a red phone right on top of the board in the back, which was the hotline. As a joke, we left the ringer on it so that when a jock was on the air and if he did something, that was the hotline. Once in a while, we'd be driving around town listening, and we'd say, let's call him while he's got the mic open. And we'd call him, and you'd hear the phone ring, and he'd get flustered and screw up and go into the commercials and all that. We used to just do that to bust guys' balls,
Yeah, brilliant. I love it. So how do you prepare for a shift, Bill? What's the process? What do you do in the sort of 40 minutes to an hour before you go on the air? What's the daily routine look like?
Okay, daily routine is I get up, I go to a meeting of AA. I go to an AA meeting because you're in broadcasting. Half of us go, half of us don't. Then I come home and I usually work out. I work out 4 to 5 days a week because, if you don't have your physical health, you're not going to get too far.
Yeah, I agree.
And then I come and then I sit down and I'll do about an hour online gathering information. I work with a guy called Jim. His name is Jim Crossan. Funny man. Very dry, sick sense of humor. Most of the time I have to edit everything he sends me. And I mean, really sick stuff. And I'll do that, collect information. I have a certain number of websites I'll go to where I pick stuff out and then maybe write a punch or just leave it alone, depending on the severity of the story. And then, I'll just hang out, have lunch, maybe take a nap for about 20 minutes, get up, go to work. And then when I get to work, I've got a certain amount of production to do. Mm-hmm. But in the interim, I take all the music logs that I'm going to be playing, and I take all the information that I'm going to need for the day, and I sort it out, schedule it out, and put in any additional information I can get from the last moment. The last 3 websites I go to are TMZ, Drudge Report, and Twitter Moments. Those are the last 3 things I do for the 15 minutes before I go on the air so I can get the most up to the minute as I can. And sure, I'll still monitor those things while I'm on the air, but not as much, because from day one I was taught by different program directors to stay focused and concentrate on what's in front of me. I've got all the information I'm going to need. Stop going to find more.
Right.
And if something does happen, or if I have to promote something, then I'll get online and tweet it, Instagram it, this, that, or the other.
When I'm watching you on Facebook and looking at your videos, I get this. I see this look in your eye, particularly when you've got a break, when you've nailed a break. Explain to me the feeling of the thrill of getting radio right. Tell me what it feels like when you've turned on a microphone and you've just smashed out a brilliant talk break. What's that feeling like?
All right, I could tell you in my own words, but twice. Howard Stern, who's very popular here.
Yeah.
And he's on Sirius XM now, but he's probably internationally
known. We know him well, yeah.
Yeah, he did a couple of shows on me. And he did one show where he's playing all my breaks on the radio and then making a comment after each break. And he described it better than I could. He said, look at the look on his face when he shuts the mic off. It's like he just came, isn't it? I can see the orgasm in his smile in his eyes. It's kind of like, Oh, yeah. That's what Howard Stern said. These are not my words.
Yeah.
But you know what? I didn't say no. That's pretty close.
CBS FM, it's Broadway Bill, professional practitioner, pronunciation announcer with adequate enunciation, here in representation of New York's greatest hit station. It's the Fix preaching against the preponderance of prevarication.
When did you start? When did you start rhyming on the air? Was that a deliberate ploy to have a device that could help you stand out from the crowd, or was it a more organic thing? How did that come about?
Yeah, much more organic. In fact, it was buried so deep. When I was maybe 7 or 8, there was a disc jockey called Mad Daddy, Pete Myers, who was on the radio late at night, about 10 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. And I'd get sent to bed, before 10 o'clock, and I'd turn my radio on in the dark, and I'd listen to Mad Daddy whumping and a bumping on the Mellow Jello side. And he'd laugh like a Dracula or something. And I would listen to him half afraid, because I was pretty young, and he sounded pretty scary. And half just really excited to hear this kind of thing coming out of my radio in my room. And so that was buried deep down inside. I loved it. I understood the magic of it. Later, when I could utilize it, I knew it was there. But I worked with a guy. His name is Scott Howitt, and he used to call himself the Smoker. He was my night jock when I was the program director at WCGQ in Columbus, Georgia. He rhymed everything, and I promoted the heck out of him. He was my night star, and it was just like Mad Daddy.
Right.
Only the Smoker was, dealing more with drugs, because it was the mid-'70s, and he would make drug references, he'd make sex references, and, it was really pretty shady, but very entertaining. I think after that, what happened was I went to become the program director at WTIC-FM in Hartford, and I was doing nights. And I called him up. I said, "Do you think this will work in a market like Hartford?" And he said, yeah, try it. And so I did it a couple times an hour. I would rhyme. By the time I got hired at KFRC in San Francisco, Jerry Cagle called me into his office and said, "You know that thing you did on that break there? I want you to do that every break. Don't not rhyme. I want you to rhyme every break." I said, "Okay, all right." And being under the pressure, because you have to remember something. In 1980 at KFRC, not only was this the big time, this was one of the few AM radio stations that were still big, because the topography of the Bay Area, it's so hilly. All the FM stations were okay, but they couldn't compete with an AM radio station that bounces off the ionosphere and hits the whole area. So that's why KFRC was still huge from an engineering standpoint. And so when I got on there, and he told me to rhyme all the time, it was back then every break. 3-minute, 4-minute records, but every break. You talked every break, and the pressure was intense. I had just turned 30 years old, so, at 30, you're kind of at your peak. You've got all the energy and youth, enthusiasm of youthfulness, yet you have a lot of the seasoning, or some of the seasoning you need to discipline yourself, to concentrate, and go on and move on to the next break, So it kind of like all happened gradually, but it kind of peaked at the right time for me.
You said in an interview a few years ago, the more listeners I can put on the air, the better. I don't hear that a lot with the Facebook content but I mean, I've had a look at a lot of the stuff you do online, so I haven't heard you working with listeners as much as I hear you as a standalone over the top of songs. But so what's the editing process? Taking a call through the desk and then getting it ready for playback. What are you looking for? What are you thinking about when you're taking a caller?
Well, first off, there is no call through the desk. I answer 10 phone lines when I get a second, or when I'm not thinking. The first thing I do is think up my next 2-3 breaks. I look on the log and say, I got 15 seconds there. I got only 5 seconds here, and I've got 45 seconds down here. I can fit in a pretty decent phone call in about 40 minutes. So then I start scouring the phones, and then I just start picking up, and I'm playful. One thing about New Yorkers, they're all playful. They're either people who want to be actors, or they're people who have lived the school of hard knocks, or they're cab drivers who talk for a living, and so the phones are a wealth of personality and information and everything else you want out of a phone call. So I just start scouring the phones. 9 times out of 10, if I've got at least a half hour before I know I'm going to play something, every once in a while, I can put something on immediately if my hands are fast enough on the Box Pro. But, I just scour. It's a very busy job for me because I do a lot of things at one time. A lot of things. I'm preparing the next break. I'm getting the phones ready. I'm actually editing. I do all of this simultaneously, and that's I guess I'm a manic depressive. When I'm not on the air, I'm depressed.
You talked before, Bill, about your love of music. It's an interesting thing. In Australia, I'm not sure what it's like in the States, but in Australia, and I've talked about this a lot. My podcast audience will know this because it's a bit of a hobby horse. There aren't too many music announcers in Australia that actually love music, or that you can hear that genuine passion for the songs. It sounds like you had that passion right at the start, and you can certainly hear that on the air. How important is that for you?
Dude, in the early 70s, I wanted to be an FM disc jockey, man. And I wanted to really say, when Mick Jagger and I spoke about this backstage, he admitted to me that he wrote this in a stupor one morning at 3 a.m.
That's who I wanted to be when I got into radio. So, because I came from a music background. Here again, that's so beneficial to me because all intros are made up of meters, beats, bars of music. So I don't have to think about it when I'm rhyming or rapping on the radio. That comes naturally. It's in the back of my head. I don't need a clock. I don't need to look at how much time I've got left. I know.
Is that right? So you've got that in your head, because it's interesting. On watching you on the video, you can see the right hand working. I'm assuming it's the volume on the song you're playing. You can just see you touching it by a centimetre up, a centimetre back. One of the things I love about what you do over the song intro is that how you sit inside the music, so you're not on top of it. It's not like the audience can't hear the music underneath, but it's you sitting right in the middle of the song, and it's the two of you working together. It's always perfect. It just fits perfectly.
Yeah, it's something I learned early. Bill Paris, when I was programming, and the way I used to demonstrate to other disc jockeys I was hiring was that you have to surf the intro, and the word is surf. That's exactly the visual I want guys to have, because you have to be in the curl. You have to be visible, audible, and yet at the same time surrounded by the music.
Yeah.
And if you got the ears for it, that's exactly what you're doing. You're right. Centimeter up, centimeter down, depending on, what, if the horn section's coming in.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, it's a work of art. It seriously is. I know that radio people care about this a lot more than the audience does. But when I see someone like yourself do it, you go, wow, here's a guy that's just absolutely got it completely sorted. Hey, a significant change to US radio came along, God, how many years ago now, the PPM rating system? Was that, it's got to be 10 years ago now, or is that longer?
No, that's exactly 10 years ago. And that's why CBS-FM came back on the radio, because they knew, Dan Mason, who was the president of CBS at the time, knew that was going to be instantaneously successful for a radio station like CBS-FM, because with the meters, it's going to pick up what people are hearing, not necessarily what they decided to listen to. It'll pick up everything that meter hears. So CBS-FM, with our music format, we knew for a fact that the music selection was always going to be so mass appeal that stores, grocery stores, gas stations, any place there's the public, if they're going to put on audio, it's going to be CBS-FM, because it can appeal to everybody and anybody. The one thing about playing classic hits that a lot of programmers never realized or never took into account 10 years ago, they do now, was the fact that even people who are very young grew up in the back seat of their parents' car.
Yeah.
And for the last 35, 40 years, people have done most of their listening in the car. That's where radio really has its bread and butter, its meat and potatoes, its largest available audience. And so if it's in the car, and the only reason it's in the car is because you have to keep your your eye on the road. So the only stimulant you can have is audio. The very fact that even young people know the old songs because their parents used to listen to it. So we knew CBS FM was going to be huge.
There was an impact for music announcers, though, and for music announcers like yourself. You said a few years ago, any distraction whatsoever was bad and wrong, and that you really had to change your thinking along the way. And that was why a lot of disc jockeys had to leave or they got fired because they just couldn't make the transition in a PPM world. Can you explain that for me? What kind of changes did you have to make?
Yeah. No distractions whatsoever. I had to go through the first level of that.
Yep.
I had to really discipline myself when I started doing mornings in San Francisco, my second trip to San Francisco, doing the KMEL Morning Zoo. When I did that, we were on the phone so much because it was such a phone interactive show. We did so many interviews with big stars that I got carried away. I had to learn how to discipline myself to be the radio board operator as well as a conversant with people on the phones and people in the studio. And that in and of itself is a total distraction. Usually interviewers have a producer who's running the board so that they can be totally engaged with the other person they're talking to and not always concerned about, let's hear what's the level like, am I going to hit this right, and that's a real discipline. And a lot of people, I think, when it came down to, first it was the phones. And so I knew that if I could discipline myself to be able to do phone calls a lot or even have guests in a lot, I could discipline myself to be able to work the internet, get instantaneous information, work social media, make instantaneous posts. I knew it could be done, but it's been very difficult. And I got to tell you something. The older I get, it isn't getting any easier.
Oh, Wow Wednesday on CBS FM.
It's Broadway, your evening companion, broadcasting from the Concrete Canyon, handing out songs you can sing along with to make you go, oh, wow. Now, I've never been known for my stellar grammar, but I try not to stutter and stammer when I bring down the hammer. This song's got so much funk, whether you're in or out of your pajama, from Astoria to Alabama. She's a bad mamma jamma, such a rabba-labba ding-dong song. Carl, couldn't go wrong.
Do you remember where you were on February 10, 1996?
Yeah, 1996. I was in San Francisco. I was out of work. I'd been out of work for almost a year at that point. I had two mortgages, one from my ex-wife and my sons back on Long Island, a new house that my new wife and my daughter and soon-to-be second daughter were in. I had 8 dependents, a dog, 2 cats.
Jesus.
And I was really sweating out the fact that I'd been out of work for a year. And, pretty soon the money was going to run out. Got a generous severance, but still the money was about to run out. And my wife was doing Young Country. Beth Bacall was doing Young Country in San Francisco. And on February 10th, 1996, I was actually holding our daughter watching my wife on stage introduce a country act. I think it was Vince Gill on stage in San Francisco. And then by the time I heard that the radio station had cranked up, I had been in touch with other people who were kind of sniffing around. We knew something was coming. The guy who actually was in charge of operating the radio station from the media corporation that owned it actually had hired me in San Francisco, so I knew him. He also fired me in San Francisco, so I was sweating out the possibilities of being hired in New York. But KTU came on the air that day,
yes,
and it was something else.
Well, so let's spend some time on that. So for the Australian audience, and obviously it's a majority Australian audience, KTU's just a historic radio station and one of the great radio wars of all time. Go and check it out online, KTU versus Z100, 1996. So there was the brilliant transition from, it was a country station, wasn't it? It was WYNY, yeah. So from midday the day before it's relaunched, 15 hours of a beating heart sound effect with the odd liner about a new radio station coming, and then at midday on the 10th, silence, and then the first song. Do you remember the first song?
No, I don't. I wasn't here.
Okay.
I was still in San Francisco.
Right.
They didn't even hire disc jockeys. I didn't get to hear the first song.
So CNC Music Factory going to make you sweat.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And now I remember it now that you say it, because we played the first day several times on the air since. But that's indicative of why the radio station was an immediate success.
Yeah, well, tell me about that. Yeah, what did they? You take me right inside that, because that must have been an amazing time. New York City, 2 incredible FM stations just smashing each other in the head, and you were right in the middle of it. What was it like?
Well, to rewind a little bit, the reason that KTU was such an immediate success is it was the second radio station to have those call letters. The first radio station that was called KTU was at 92 KTU, and it was in the late 70s when disco blew up, and no place was the home of disco like New York.
Right.
Disc jockey by the name of Paco was on at night, and Joe Causey, who's now on at CBS FM, was the morning man, and it just blew up and became the number one station in New York because it rode the wave at just the right time to the disco era. Secondly, a station that I used to work at in New York, Hot 97, introduced the Hispanic angle to that same mix of music in the late 80s, and that was called Hot 97, and we really garnered and multiplied the audience by adding Hispanic suburbs. Everything got added to that original KTU audience. So 10 years later, or 8 years later, KTU cranks up, and the reason it's so identifiable to all the metro area, and I mean metro areas, because New York City is such a combination of small neighborhoods and so many different nationalities living in these pockets that it's a lot of little small towns, and the whole key to making it in New York is hitting every one of these small individualized neighborhoods. So Z100 had always been the station since 1983. It did a great job of super serving the top 40 audience. Scott Shannon knew exactly how to do it. He was the architect of the station. The reason that we came along and were so successful is because pop music at the time in 1996 was in such a doldrums. You either had to be rap or you had to be alternative. The center lane was just empty.
Yeah.
There was just nothing in the middle going down. So what happens? KTU comes on the air, and we amass so many different neighborhood loving kind of, it's not disco, it's not freestyle, it's not pop, it's not R&B, it's everything. And we made sure to hire disc jockeys from every radio station's past, and there was a disc jockey on the air representing just about every radio station that had ever made it in New York. And it was instant. At first book, we were like number 4 or 5. By 3 months into it, it was number 1 every demographic. Teens, young adults, older adults, dead people, everybody listened.
So when did you come on board? So you followed the launch? Is that so you were the station was on the air when you joined? Is that right?
Dude, when I got on the air, my wife was in California, and she had to have she was going to have open heart surgery.
Jeez.
My sons on Long Island had accidentally, they were very young at the time, and they burned down the house. I'm in San Francisco, and I need this job. Time's running out. Money's running out. I got to come and do an audition at KTU immediately. Yet I had to be there for my wife and daughter because she needed open heart surgery.
Shit.
And the boys just, burned down the house on Long Island. And I got to go do a week audition on KTU. So I called them up and I said, can you give me another week? And fortunately, the doctors realized after they did the pretest for my wife's open heart surgery, they realized that, it kind of cleared up. You can wait a few months. And the boys got moved into a new home. So the next week worked perfect. This was March 20th, 1996. So it had been about a month and a half.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And I got in there. I did a morning show for a week, and I had a lot of friends that would call up. I had a lot of music artists that I had known from Hot 97, and they came in. I had Lisa Taylor from Z100 as my co-host. She was there. We did a bang-up week, and that was it. They just said, okay, let's talk money and let's get in here. I think you're better in afternoons. I said,
Oh, yeah.
So what happens in a radio war in New York when you've got these two behemoths going head to head? What were the tactics? What were the instructions from your program director in terms of how you needed to approach the on-air component of it?
Yeah, the on-air component of it was not so much. We didn't really admit their existence at Z100.
Okay, yep.
But we kind of subliminally did. Our promotion teams would always get in fights with theirs. Every time both radio stations were going to the same event, it was almost, a riot because our guys would get in combat with these guys. On the air, we tried to just realize the fact that we were ahead anyway, so we don't even have to acknowledge them too much on the air. We were beating the heck out of them. Then, at about 2 years into this, the same company bought both radio stations.
Right.
Actually, the company that owned Z100 bought us. We had everything we needed from promotions and management and sales and programming, certainly. We had everything a radio station could want. The best people, the best spirit. We had the perfect combination of chemistry and electricity and momentum that a radio station could want for a decade. And we did have a decade. And when this other company bought us, they just started picking us off one by one and taking them over to Z100.
Right.
They took our promotion director, sent him to Z100. They took our general manager and sent him to Z100. They took one of our overnight guys and moved him to Z100. And this went on for 10 years, so we got weaker and weaker, still in the top 5, always for 10 years,
right.
But weaker and weaker. Z100 got stronger and stronger. So what they really did was move Z100 into a position of strength. And this was at the same time that Elvis Duran was getting bigger and bigger and better and better. I mean, when he made the transition from afternoons at Z100 to mornings, Elvis and I go way back. Elvis was getting better and better and stronger and stronger. He, at this point, really was... He was actually our first choice for mornings at KTU. When we got on the air in 1996, Frankie Blue, the program director, desperately wanted Elvis Duran to be our morning man. Just couldn't do it. They counter-offered, and we couldn't get him. But deciding to settle on RuPaul turned out to be a pretty good idea.
Yeah,
because RuPaul, who's now an international,
superstar,
multi-platform star, certainly stuck out like a sore thumb to Kingdom Come.
Let's talk about what's happening for you right now, CBS FM. So they've built the studio so you can stand up. I love that. They have to kind of customize the studio for you.
Oh, my God. When I first got to CBS FM, we were right there at Times Square in the CBS complex, 1515 Broadway. And they had good enough equipment. It had cobwebs on it because they had been automated for 2 years. So they had to dust off all the equipment. And it was, okay. It still worked. But all of the consoles were, when I mean low, you had to lower your chair to sit down at these boards. And I'm going, oh, God, I'm going to suck. I mean, and, I don't know how, number one, you could get breath control in that position, especially these old disc jockeys that worked at CBS FM. Don't get me wrong, CBS FM's a heritage station. I got nothing but love and respect for everybody who ever worked there. True pioneers, leaders, and mentors for us all in the business. But by the time CBS FM went off the air in 2005, they were old, probably as old as I am. But they let them, none of them work out. None of them stayed healthy. None of them, cared as much about the business as I still do, I guess. Everything was low to the ground. It was, no way you could get any louder than this when you're sitting there talking on a microphone at CBS FM, and that was what it sounded like. And when I got there, that's what it looked like. That's what the studios looked like. So they decided to move out of there because they were building new facilities downtown in Soho, but they weren't going to be ready for a year. So they moved us up to 57th Street, where we actually had to move in with K-Rock 92.3, where Howard Stern was working. We were okay with that, but they built us a makeshift studio in a closet. And Dan Herschel, who was the chief engineer at the time, I said, Dan, as long as you're building these, please take it up and please make it tall enough so I can stand up. And the studio was just awful. It was all taped with, and, chewing gum together. And it was just, bare bones and got it done. But damn it, I was standing up, and I really had a quantum leap in my performance at CBS FM when that happened, because I was able to stand up. The thing about it for me, if you're not standing up, you will definitely be slower. You will definitely be quieter. You will definitely be more reserved, because people who are sitting down are more reserved than people who are standing up. Look in the street.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I did most of my work standing up, and I always felt like you could just felt more relaxed and just felt more in control, when you're on your feet and you can move around a bit and you can kind of integrate yourself into the desk a bit better. And no, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I'm sure the audience will get online and have a look at some of your YouTube videos as well as the Facebook content, and all of it's there, standing up right next to the desk, integrated in. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, Broadway Billy, you don't have to tell me. I know these trains aren't running for shiddly D. That's why I'm broadcasting to be clever. Now more than ever, you got to throw your work on the floor, head straight for the door. Doesn't matter if the boss is sore. Throw back your head and roar. It's Friday. I'm out of here, Broadway. Pour me a beer.
Hey, Bill, you've been in radio studios now for, almost 45 years. And can I say, whenever I see and hear you on Facebook and hear you on the air, I hear pure joy. I hear a person who has found his calling and is living his passion, and it's just such an inspiration to hear. As I said, I was on the air for 20 years. I got to 37, and I just didn't have the energy or discipline to be able to do the on-air shift that I knew I needed to. But here you are doing, I think, your best work. Where do you get the energy and the passion and enthusiasm from?
I always, for so many decades, I've known how to do it. So technically, the tools are still there.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I quit. I used to smoke a pipe in the studio, and, just an older guy. What can I tell you? Some, addictions are hard to give up. And so when I quit smoking my pipe, because I had to about 2011, they told me there was a nodule on my thyroid gland. And it scared the hell out of me. Yeah. So I decided to quit smoking my pipe. When I have to, when I want to, I use an e-cig now, and it's not tar. It's still nicotine, but it's not tar, and it's not carcinogens, and it's not all that bad stuff. And my throat got better immediately. And so I started to get some of my pipes back, or at least enough to work. Other guys I know in the business haven't. And that's why, because of smoking. And I mean, there was a time, in your 20s and 30s, you want to smoke, you want to drink, give me another whiskey, because it actually made your voice sound good. But the payback is 20 years later, it starts to eat away at your vocal cords and put too much phlegm in there. And before you know it, you can't even talk anymore. Or you're talking like this, because that's the way a lot of guys wound up sounding. And I didn't want that to happen, because somewhere deep down inside, radio is such an integral part of who I am as a person, because it puts together my love of music. It puts together my ability to have the freedom to say what I need to say that day, to an extent. And I just find it's always been, don't get me wrong, I love my family. I love my children. I'll probably love them much more now that I'm getting more and more time for them and not as much for radio. And they paid for it. When I moved from town to town, when, I had to get in there to do extra gigs, and when I had to stay out late doing nightclub gigs, they paid for it. And that's something I kind of regret now as I look back on it. But I can't help it. It's the way I came up. It made me who I am today. All of those years of just wanting to do anything and everything for my career, and not even my career, but for the love of radio. The love of music is really where it all springs from. And so to this day, I will listen to a variety of radio stations, a variety of music, everything from Christian to death metal. I will listen to and appreciate really on every level. Even, classical music sometimes when I need to. I will listen to everything except my radio station, because when I get in that studio, I want to love it. I want to move to it. I want to be moved by it. And that's what keeps me so in touch with what song I played for the 9,000th time this month.
Fleetwood Mac, Go Your Own Way. Here it comes again. Hey,
it's only got a 4-second intro. Come on.
That's it. No, it's no good to you. Hey, I saw a quote about 10 years ago. You said this about music announcers. This is about 10 years ago. You said, we're the last ones. The disc jockey is just about gone. You know, what skills will the next generation of music announcer need to survive?
I think before we even look at the announcer, we got to look at the platform. Here's the thing. Once these AI automobiles come into vogue, once they're commonplace, there is absolutely no reason to sit in a car and just listen. No reason whatsoever.
Exactly.
Stop and consider at home. Do you listen to the radio much at home? You may listen to music, but listen to the radio. You turn on your TV, you get on the internet, you do a million other things other than just sit and listen, staring off at the wallpaper. That's not what you're there to do. In automobiles, when the AI automobile gets commonplace and you don't have to look at the road or your surroundings or traffic or any of the rest of it, I don't believe terrestrial radio will be as popular or viable. I just don't think it'll, even satellite radio at this point. Maybe podcasts, if someone's sitting there with their eyes closed, because with a podcast, you can totally tailor to what your mood is at that moment. Do you want to hear information? Do you want to hear education? Do you want to hear soothing? Do you want to hear whatever? You can close your eyes and do that in an AI automobile. And don't get me wrong, I know how things work in the United States. They'll take the interstate highway system and make a law that says, okay, no more human drivers on the interstate highways, only AI automobiles, and they'll restrict them to only artificial intelligence automobiles. So then it's going to become commonplace, and there's nothing we can do about it. So terrestrial radio, audio radio, other than perhaps podcasts and specialized channels, probably will go the way of, the VCR. But I think the performer, obviously, it's pretty self-evident at this point. You have to be a multi-platform performer if you're going to be anybody. Ryan Seacrest is probably going to be inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame this year because he's a multi-platform personality. He's on television, he's on radio, he's in production, he's on print media, he's everywhere, because nowadays the radio performer isn't really going to be able to make it on just the strength of radio alone. So for all of us, for me, I'm not trying to be a star anymore. I'm getting closer to retirement than I am to career advancement. The reason I decided to put out the videos, for one reason, educationally, or just to, touch base with people coming up saying, here's how we used to do it.
Yeah.
The very idea of, when people keep asking me, how come you don't have your own YouTube channel and monetize it? You know what? After I'm retired, maybe I'll do that. It'd be a nice second income, but honestly, I think the radio performer has to think in terms of video, or they have to think in terms of specialized podcasting. You are an absolute proof of this. And that's why guys who are on radio now, men and women who are on the radio now, have to think outside of what they're doing today. Yes, at this moment, it's still a captive audience in traffic, very captive audience in traffic. But that dynamic is going to go away pretty soon. I personally think within 20 years, within 10 perhaps.
Yeah, no, I think it's we're on a fast track. 10, 15, 20 years, it will be very different. Hey, let's finish up by going back to the start. A young Bill Lee is just about to start his first shift in Cleveland. I'm sure it wasn't rubbish, Bill. I'm sure it was an okay first shift. What's the one piece of advice?
Bill Lanky at WLYT 92.3. WLYT, we love you truly.
What's the one piece of advice you'd give to that young kid starting out?
Concentration, imagination, and dedication. I don't know. I don't know that I could give any advice, because it's everything I know is such a combination of so many little details. The advice would have to be so broad for me to be able to verbalize it to my younger self that I'd have to just say something like, always concentrate. Always remember that you're talking to someone. Underneath all the skill you have to acquire to do this job, you have to remember who's listening to you right now and tailor not only what you're saying, but the thinking that goes into what you're saying. it's taken me so long to learn that. It's really, I didn't learn until I became a morning man 20 years into my career that I actually have to listen to people. It's so hard to listen when you're controlling.
Yeah.
And the disc jockey is just a controller. We were all brought up to be controllers of audio. I control the audio. I control the concept and the content. And when you're doing that, it's very difficult to also place yourself as a listener, as, okay, what's this sound like coming out of the radio? Okay, what's this person telling me that they would like? What are these people actually responding to or not responding to? The beautiful part about social media, more than anything else, is the instantaneous feedback. That's something radio has never afforded their performers before. Instantaneous feedback. Don't get me wrong, back in the golden age of radio, they had a better idea because they had a live studio audience. And that actually accomplished, it was a very low-tech way of accomplishing the very same thing. And it seems like technically, the farther we get into this age of the digital age, we're realizing that perhaps we're using digital techniques and processors to accomplish these things. But if you go back and see the chicken and the egg, you'll realize what the important thing to highlight and improve the technology will be. Amazing. Just amazing.
Hey, Broadway Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure. You're an inspiration to so many. I know in the States you've got a huge fan base, but certainly here in Australia, we just love what you do. And thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. It's been it's been a career highlight to talk to you, mate. It really has. And take care, and we'll be watching and listening to you on Facebook, mate.
Well, you know what to do, don't you?
What do I need to do?
Stay calm, kiss your mom, ban the bomb, do the best you can. God loves you, man. Or be special, be saved, be cracked, and behave.
You're a legend. Thanks, Bill.
All right, take care, Craig.
Game Changers Radio is a production of Craig Bruce Coaching and Bad Producer Productions. You can find all of Craig's chats with broadcasting's best at radiogamechangers.com. There, you can sign up to receive the weekly Game Changers newsletter, which features articles from Craig and Bad Producer Productions, as well as more great lessons from the Game Changers. Support Game Changers Radio by leaving a review at Apple Podcasts. Visit our Facebook page and stay in touch with Craig on Twitter at @CB_Bruce. And if you have colleagues or mates who